Right now, NATO has moved to the border with Russia. The alliance headquarters is ready to act at any moment. This is no joke. Putin's end is near. Ukraine is launching swarms of strike drones at Russia. Drone apocalypse technology is the warfare of a new generation. The Ukrainian drone swarm is deciding the fate of the Kremlin. A complete disaster in Russia's rear. Urgent! Putin has launched an operation. Moldova is under attack. The invasion has already begun. Moscow is breaking everything and everyone. Urgent! The buffer zone in Ukraine, this decision has already been made. They have actually decided to divide Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces have already found a clever response. The details will shock you. Stay tuned. Urgent. China is waging war behind everyone's backs. A global conspiracy has been uncovered. The shocking truth about Putin and Xi. No one expected this. Chaos in Chechnya. Did Kadyrov decide to leave his post due to death? Dondan's relatives are taking over all the positions. The Kremlin is not sleeping and is preparing its bloody plan. All this and more coming up in our episode of Hotspot. Sensational. The alliance is advancing. NATO has deployed ground forces right under Russia's nose. This is a signal to Moscow. The northern border of the swamps is in the crosshairs. Putin is furious. A military turning point is near. Watch explosive details right now.
NATO is Russia's new neighbor. As of September 1st, the regional command headquarters of the alliance's ground forces has officially begun operating in the Finnish city of Mikkeli, according to the Finnish army. Mikkeli is located just 140 kilometers from the Russian border and a little over 300 kilometers from St. Petersburg.
This decision is a clear political signal to the Russian Federation that Finland is a full-fledged member of NATO. We can consider this a counter-move by the NATO bloc in response to the construction of new military bases near the Finnish border. This includes Kandalaksha, Petrozavodsk, and a number of other settlements within the Russian Federation.
At the initial stage, the headquarters plans to accommodate about a dozen people. In the future, they plan to increase the staff fivefold.
NATO is making it clear to the Russian Federation what possible scenarios for further developments might be. At a time of escalating tensions directly on the borders with the NATO bloc. Let me remind you, Finland joined the NATO bloc in 2023, and after that the total length of NATO's borders with the Russian Federation doubled and currently stands at 2,600 kilometers.
The headquarters will manage the alliance's ground forces in the northern region, coordinate the actions of national armies, as well as jointly plan exercises and operations. The new structure will be subordinate to NATO's Norfolk Command in the United States, which is responsible for the Atlantic and the Arctic.
Recently, the Russian Federation has been undertaking a series of provocative actions on the borders with the NATO bloc. This concerns not only land borders but also accordingly maritime borders. This includes the incursion of a Russian vessel into Estonia's territorial waters. This includes the statement by the Russian Ministry of Defense regarding claims to the Swedish island of Gotland in the Baltic Sea. And these are indeed the most recent and significant actions involving the deliberate jamming of global positioning system GPS signals, specifically and directly affecting the aircraft carrying Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission.
Finland's Minister of Defense Antti Häkkänen has approved the deployment for August 2025. Last fall, Häkkänen emphasized that the establishment of the headquarters in Mikkeli is a signal to Moscow. Finland is a full-fledged member of NATO. The alliance plays a key role in ensuring its defense.
NATO has taken advantage of the current situation that has developed in the post-Soviet space. Accordingly, no one asked the Russian Federation for permission regarding Finland and Sweden's accession. Essentially, the point was that Finland's entry into NATO marked the end of 75 years of neutrality.
The main reason Finland abandoned its long-standing neutrality and joined NATO was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Threatening to forbid the expansion of the military alliance, the Kremlin dictator launched a war in Ukraine, where for the fourth year he has been killing people and destroying their homes. Meanwhile, right under his nose, or more precisely, right up to Russia's border, NATO crept up unnoticed by Putin, expanding its scale and spheres of influence.
The future of war has arrived. Ukrainian drones with artificial intelligence are taking out the occupiers. This is a revolution in drone warfare. A swarm of drones is deciding Russia's fate. Ukraine is showing how artificial intelligence is shifting the balance of power. What is the secret behind the Ukrainian armed forces' success? And what new military technologies are haunting the occupiers? Watch right now.
Swarms of AI-powered drones have already entered the battlefield. On this new frontier of warfare, Ukraine is using technology that allows groups of drones to communicate and make decisions independently of their operator.
According to Western journalists, Ukraine is using artificial intelligence in military operations so that groups of drones can coordinate their actions to attack well-defended Russian positions. Military experts claim that operations involving large and small groups of drones represent a new stage in the war. Such innovations make it possible to deploy dozens or even thousands of drones simultaneously to overcome any air defense systems and target defenses, whether it's a city or a specific military facility.
If it becomes possible to scale up production and so-called swarm attacks occur, meaning when a swarm is flying, it's clear that you can shoot down part of the swarm, but you can't shoot down 100 drones flying at the same time. Well, in that case, of course, there will be major disruptions to the power grid, significant disruptions to the transportation system, and the destruction of normal life will begin. We've actually seen this already this year with air transport, and now we're seeing it with railways. This drone war, it has made Russia weak. It's impossible to deploy air defense systems everywhere. There simply aren't enough of them in such quantities.
Analysts consistently insist that this truly innovative technology is a clear harbinger of the future of modern warfare. Meanwhile, at the Ukrainian company that developed the unique software, they are lifting the veil of secrecy a bit about what to expect from this new military development. It turns out that a swarm of strike drones, like a living organism, analyzes what is happening in real time and makes decisions based on the situation.
The drones can decide which one will strike first and adapt to the circumstances. For example, if one of them runs out of battery power, Ukrainian forces began using this technology about a year ago to lay mines. Since then, it has been used to strike Russian troops, equipment, and infrastructure.
And it must be admitted, they are using it extremely effectively. In the Kremlin, just hearing the phrase drone swarm is enough to make their knees shake. Even the enemy admits that they simply have nothing to counter such advanced Ukrainian weaponry.
They are truly impressive.
By the way, if something goes wrong during such an autonomous operation, the system immediately hands control over to a human operator. Fortunately, another cutting-edge Ukrainian technology promises to help with this, Kolibri 13 FR1. This is a so-called relay drone for FPV, featuring autonomous navigation and resistance to electronic warfare. It's an inexpensive alternative to the Chinese DJI, which is widely used on the front lines.
At the very beginning of the Russian invasion, Russia was striking Ukraine with missiles and drones almost unopposed, while Ukraine couldn't respond. There was practically nothing to strike back with on Russian territory. But now, as they say, here we are. Now Ukraine has drones that are taking out Russian industry. Ukraine has acquired long-range missiles, but as Putin says, the special military operation is going according to plan. Apparently, this is part of the plan too.
The new domestically produced UAV is not just a drone, it's an entire system that includes 2 relay carriers, a ground control station, and additional antennas. This approach makes it possible to maintain a stable communication channel at the tactical level. The drone's design is modular, which allows for quick replacement of damaged components right on the battlefield. Among the advantages of the Ukrainian Kolibri are its resistance to strong winds and low temperatures, as well as the ability to operate both day and night.
When they are taught to interact with each other, when they are taught to guide each other to targets, or let's say to cover each other, just like we see at those Chinese shows where drones perform all sorts of beautiful formations in the sky. It will be the same thing, only in war. That, of course, would be absolutely terrifying. It's completely unclear how one could fight against this if drones are taught to think, so to speak, to make decisions, especially if drones are taught to make decisions to engage targets. That would be an absolute nightmare.
So how does the Kremlin respond to all this? Instead of developing new types of air defense systems, Putin is putting all the efforts of the Russian defense industry into creating more and more methods of terror. In particular, they are actively improving their Shahed drones, training them to strike residential buildings of peaceful Ukrainians as accurately as possible. This unpleasant news was recently shared with us by a military radio technology specialist with the call sign Flash. According to him, Russian mopeds have recently become much more dangerous and deadly.
Here's a fresh find just now. See those antennas mounted on the wingtips? Unfortunately, unlike the Iran drones, we haven't been able to find the modem or the camera. They are disassembled and burned. For those who don't know, this is a new version of the Shahed drone, which can be controlled online from Russia, can conduct reconnaissance, and even attack moving targets.
However, to be fair, the Ukrainian defense industry began working on improving Ukraine's air defense system long before this. By staying ahead of the enemy, our engineers are already actively developing our own version of the HIMARS system. The foreign rocket system has proven its effectiveness on the battlefield with high accuracy and the ability to operate at long distances. That's exactly what we need. For Ukraine, having its own counterpart to American weaponry means not only reducing dependence on Allied supplies, but also the ability to adapt the system to modern warfare conditions and the specific nature of combat operations. While the technical specifications of the Ukrainian system have not yet been disclosed, experts suggest that it involves a wheeled platform with high mobility, capable of launching guided missiles over distances of hundreds of kilometers. So it's high time for the occupiers to start preparing for new surprises from the Ukrainian armed forces.
Shock of the invasion of Moldova, the Kremlin has gone off the leash. The bunker plan has been revealed. Everything is already in motion. The world is in shock. Putin's decree is scarier than you thought. The Kremlin won't stop. What's really happening? Watch right now. They couldn't influence the presidential elections, so now they've set their sights on the parliamentary ones. And yes, of course, we're talking about the Kremlin, but as always, outside of Russia.
And regarding Russia's aggressive plans towards Europe, I want to emphasize once again that this is complete nonsense with absolutely no basis whatsoever.
Yeah, right.
And we just went ahead and believed it. We especially believed the authorities in Moldova, where presidential elections were held a year ago and the Kremlin's influence lost. But now there's a new battle, the battle for the parliamentary elections, which will take place on September 28th.
First of all, I want to point out that they only narrowly lost the presidential elections. That's why, of course, the parliamentary elections are also important, because the parliament in Moldova holds quite a lot of power. They appoint many officials.
But why is Putin holding on to Moldova so tightly?
It's perfectly clear. The main objective, aside from the political one, which is, of course, also important, is the military, the strategic goal, which is also significant. They want to use Moldova, just like Transnistria, but Moldova is even more important here because it has airports and airfields to amass their troops for a possible offensive in southern Ukraine.
But as a means of influence in Moldova, the Kremlin has chosen religion. Yes, exactly what would seem to be going too far. But representatives of pro-Russian parties held campaign events at the walls of an ancient monastery.
And in fact, the KGB always used, well, I think the successors of the KGB, the FSB, have used the church as, let's say, a tool, both for espionage activities and for influencing minds. So there's nothing surprising here. I don't see anything unusual about them working through the church. I think that in Moldova, people are quite conservative and the church has a strong influence there.
In addition to the well-known traditional propaganda, the Kremlin is creating religious and informational centers in monasteries and churches. But here's the question, does this really work on ordinary people in Moldova?
To some extent, it can have an impact, yes. If there are priests who have been bribed by the Kremlin and who campaign for Kremlin-backed candidates, then yes, it works. This is exactly the kind of soft power that the Kremlin uses quite actively. Trump, for example, is rejecting soft power, but the Kremlin understands perfectly well that soft power is a very useful tool.
But here's what's interesting. By law, religious organizations are not allowed to participate in election campaigning. The law exists, but why isn't it being followed?
There are always indirect ways, right? You don't necessarily have to campaign for Vasha Papkin, so to speak. You can just talk about how this or that one thing or another is good and something else is bad. Once again, the godless West, all that sort of thing. A move towards closer ties with the European Union, and there are all sorts of bad things there.
But that's not all the ways the Kremlin is known to influence people. They can simply pay them.
The Kremlin allocates $300 million to organize the transportation of voters from Transnistria. It's important to understand that Transnistria, which is in fact a Russian-controlled enclave, is home to people who hold Moldovan citizenship. And if you bring them over to Moldova, that's just for a moment 200,000 votes. Well, that's the total number of Transnistria's residents, of course. Nevertheless, for Moldova's scale, these are quite significant numbers.
The Kremlin is under observation. The European Parliament has announced that it will monitor the elections in Chisinau.
The goal of this mission is to strengthen the resilience of the Republic of Moldova in the face of hybrid threats. It will play a key role in supporting the Moldovan authorities in countering Russian interference, especially ahead of the 2025 parliamentary elections.
But Russia has already begun exerting its influence in Moldova and will surely see it through to the end, no matter how much the Kremlin tries to convince us otherwise.
Unlike the West, we don't meddle in other people's affairs.
But if the European Parliament and Moldova itself are ready to stand up to the Kremlin, what are the chances that Putin will get his way? Or will his efforts once again come to nothing?
In general, the extensive and crucial information work, primarily the comprehensive efforts that the European Union urgently needs to undertake today for its robust protection and effective counter-propaganda strategies, is clearly and demonstrably insufficient at present. This critical deficiency poses a significant challenge. And although I see that a task force has indeed landed in Moldova and from the other side as well, we'll see how all this plays out, whether Moscow will manage to pull it off, but I believe this situation is very, very dangerous.
No matter what the Kremlin says, they definitely like to interfere in other countries. Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova have already been targets of pressure more than once. And now even religion has become a tool for agitation and propaganda.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Urgent. China's secret plan has shocked the world. A global conspiracy has been uncovered. Putin is humiliated and Xi is deciding the fate of the world. What should we really expect from Beijing, and what role will it play in future peace negotiations? What are they hiding from us? Watch right now.
This is footage from the camera of a downed Russian Gerber drone. A recording from a Chinese factory where this UAV was being tested was found on it. The video was published by Ukrainian serviceman Serhiy Flash Beskresnov. The drone is equipped with an A40 Pro camera manufactured by View Pro. The factory is located in Shenzhen. The war in Ukraine has turned into a drone war. And for Russia, the war would now be impossible without Chinese supplies of components.
China supplies Russia with engines, antennas, drone control panels, and ready-made kits of civilian UAVs. For the fiber optic drones that have been actively used since last year, China supplies Russia with fiber optic cables. Russia's own production is limited to a single factory, which became a target for the Ukrainian army in April. The largest Chinese fiber optic manufacturers, Youngtes, Optical Fiber and Cable and Fiber Home Technologies, do not officially supply their products directly to Russia. However, in 2024, China supplied 382,000 tons of fiber optic cable to Central Asian countries, according to the Index Box report. By rough estimates, that's about 4 million kilometers of cable.
According to the publication Verska, Beijing has become a key supplier of military technologies to Moscow. On the last day of summer, Putin flew to China for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit and also attended a military parade marking the end of World War II. It seems that China has decided to finally put an end to its pretense of being a neutral peacemaker in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Since 2022, one of the most serious threats to Ukraine has been the direct and large-scale military assistance from China to Russia.
When it came to the Kremlin purchasing weapons from North Korea or Iran, its options were objectively quite limited: shells, drones, and missiles. But the Chinese defense industry consists of active production lines for all types of weaponry, some of which are directly compatible with Soviet and Russian systems. Source: Defense Express.
Since the beginning of the war, China has sharply increased its exports to Russia of materials used for the production of explosives. This is just one of many examples. Beijing covers about half of Russia's needs for the stabilizer Defini Lamely. It allows for the storage and use of nitrocellulose in gunpowder production.
According to 2023 data, China supplies about 90% of Russia's imports of high-priority goods subject to G7 controls, as stated in the ICIC report. We're talking about technologies necessary for the production of missiles, drones, and precision weapons. Components from Western manufacturers like Texas Instruments, Intel, and Analog Devices continue to make their way into Russia through Chinese intermediaries. These components have been found in downed Russian Iskander-M missiles, KH-101 cruise missiles, and Lancet attack drones. In addition to electronics, China supplies Russia with industrial machines necessary for military production. Chinese deliveries account for more than half or even 80% of Russia's machine tool imports, compared to 12% and 20% before the war, according to the publication Verstka.
Support for Russia is not limited to military supplies. During the war, China has become the largest buyer of Russian oil and Russia's biggest trading partner in other sectors as well.
Starting from the flow of cheap raw materials from Russia, which have become even cheaper, and ending with no one has ever been bothered by another country's dependence on you. In other words, you just need to stay longer here, but at the very least, things don't get worse for you. Secondly, we really are talking about the fact that America is wearing down its own resources on Russia.
If Russia becomes a pro-Western country that supports American policy towards China, China will find itself in a strategic encirclement. Therefore, throwing Russia under the bus and completely abandoning its support is absolutely unacceptable for China. Carnegie Alexander, director of the Berlin Center.
In the current format of the conflict, China is considered the biggest beneficiary of the Russia-Ukraine war, and Putin's visit to Xi is further confirmation of this. For China, in this case, there are only advantages. It gets cheap resources from Russia and has an additional geopolitical lever of influence in its maneuvers with the US and the EU.
A buffer zone in Ukraine, salvation or a death sentence. Europe floated the idea, but it's a complete failure. Without weapons for Ukraine, no zone will save it. Why is a buffer zone in Ukraine more dangerous than active combat? Find out more in the following report.
The creation of a buffer zone 40 kilometers wide. This initiative is being considered by European partners as part of a peace agreement. This is reported by SLS, citing anonymous sources from the publication Politico. Allegedly, according to journalists, Moscow supported the idea. There has been no response from Ukraine yet, which is not surprising, because the creation of a buffer zone most likely implies the loss of some territories controlled by Kyiv. Only Jim Townsend, a former Pentagon official who oversaw policy on Europe and NATO in the Obama administration, openly commented on this idea to Politico.
The Russians are grasping at straws. They're not afraid of the Europeans. If they think that a couple of British and French observers will stop them from marching into Ukraine, they're mistaken.
European diplomats are trying not to comment on the actual partition of Ukraine. It also remains unclear who is ready to send their peacekeepers and when. So far, only the French and the British have spoken positively about it. The commander of the Lithuanian forces stated that his subordinates would only go to Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire or a peace agreement. The authorities of Poland and Germany are opposed, just like the United States. Another problem is the number of troops. Currently, NATO is having difficulties preparing rapid response forces to defend the alliance's eastern flank from a possible future Russian attack. For this, 300,000 personnel are needed. Meanwhile, patrolling potential buffer zones will require an additional 4,000 to 60,000 military personnel. They will not only monitor compliance with agreements, but also train defense forces.
NATO members are negotiating with US representatives about providing satellite intelligence and air support, although they are not counting on much greater involvement. Senior Pentagon officials have already informed their European colleagues that the US role in any security guarantees for Ukraine will be minimal. The US Department of Defense did not respond to a request for comment. The US is perhaps the only NATO country with a sufficient number of satellites to provide intelligence data. These are necessary to monitor whether Russia is violating the terms of a ceasefire or peace agreement.
These proposals from the Europeans, who have a bloody war raging right next door, are perceived by Ukrainians as empty words.
If they actually provide troops, then yes, because other restrictions on Russia don't work. On paper, it's not worth a damn. Send missiles, send troops, send weapons. The question for Europe is, do you actually have weapons? No, but they're ready to send troops. They're ready, but not all of them, and not now, only after a peaceful settlement. We're telling them one simple thing. Friends, you're preparing for war, thinking the Russians will attack you, but we can make sure they don't. Send troops now, bring them into Ukrainian territory right away, and the situation will be resolved. But the Europeans think we have Budapest, which turned out to be just a worthless piece of paper. Zero, we have the Ichkeria case, better known today as Kadyrovism.
Interestingly, it was the Russian dictator who was the first to announce the creation of a buffer zone in Ukraine in the spring of 2025. At that time, this statement served as a kind of justification for Russia's war of aggression in Sumy and Kharkiv regions. After a massive attack on Ukraine, which killed 23 people in Kyiv alone, the Kremlin sent Maria Zakharova to the microphone to speak directly in Russian. Once again, she voiced the Russians' conditions. The peace treaty must include demilitarization, denazification, and a neutral, non-bloc, and non-nuclear status for Ukraine. Interestingly, Zakharova made this statement on the Day of Remembrance for the fallen defenders of Ukraine. It was established at the end of August for a reason. 11 years ago, the Russians, by agreement, allowed the encircled Ukrainian armed forces near Ilovaisk to withdraw through the so-called Green Corridor. But they did not keep their promises and simply shot the unarmed soldiers as if at a shooting range.
Breaking news. Kadyrov is preparing for death. His family is already dividing power, the end of an era. Don Bolin is passing everything on to his relatives unpredictably. Moscow is preparing a strike against the Kadyrov clan. All of Chechnya is on edge. Watch the details right now.
The system of power in Chechnya has long been built around the cult of the Kadyrov family. For Ramzan Kadyrov, this is both a strength and a weakness. Everything is personally subordinated to him. But new data shows that it's not just about controlling the region. Don is building a true dynasty, consolidating his influence in case of his death.
Whoever is trusted gets appointed.
According to BBC estimates, more than 80 members of the Kadyrov clan already hold key positions in the government. 20 control the security forces, 11 sit in parliament. The rest are ministers, businessmen, heads of foundations and sports clubs. This is not a coincidence. It is a carefully constructed system of hereditary power transfer.
People have simply resigned themselves to this fate. They are not submissive, I know this for sure. We have a very serious underground movement in Chechnya, but today the situation in Chechnya can be described as concentration camps where people are gathered and held. The entire population is being held hostage. There are those who serve this regime, and on television and in propaganda, they use exactly those who currently serve these occupational structures. But the general population who are waiting and biding their time remain unseen and unnoticed. People are simply trying to survive and make it through these circumstances.
Kadyrov has strengthened the system through marriage alliances as well. His children have become related by marriage to at least 15 influential Chechen clans. The Delimkanovs, the Geremaevs, the Vismuradovs and others. In this way, through weddings and business, he is creating a stronghold for his family, turning Chechnya into his personal principality.
With these strategic marriage alliances, Kadyrov is actively trying to secure the personal and unwavering support of the most influential and powerful Chechen clans within the region. In the event that this informal contract with Vladimir Putin, the Russian dictator, is indeed terminated, we are well aware that for many, many years, Ramzan Kadyrov had the absolute right to do absolutely whatever he desired and consistently remain entirely unpunished, and he very actively took full advantage of this situation. Both in terms of political assassinations, influence on federal politics, corruption, and these harems that the project reported on. So if Putin abandons this logic of personal immunity for Kadyrov and his plan, then the Kadyrov family's operation will have to rely on the loyalty of other Chechen clans, which are close to Kadyrov's but still exist separately from him.
The heirs have already been assigned their roles. The eldest, Akhmat, has taken charge of sports and the Akhmat Football Club. The second, Zelimkhan, runs the Fight Club and the Boxing Federation. But according to experts, the main successor is the third son, Adam. His scandalous notoriety has only helped him. After beating a prisoner in the Grozny detention center, the teenager was not charged. On the contrary, he was rewarded. A few weeks later, he became the youngest head of the regional leader's security service. At 17, Adam is already the secretary of the Chechen Security Council. His career, quite remarkably, mirrors Ramzan's own path. Everything is also mapped out for the women in the family. The eldest daughter, Aishat, went from fashion designer to deputy prime minister and now owns Chechen Mineral Waters, which brings in billions in revenue. Kodezhat, Tabarik and Kudmat, along with their husbands, have also been placed in key positions in government and business. But behind this image of closeness and ostentatious luxury lies fear. Don's own health has been a matter of concern for several years now. Frequent medical leaves, rumors of a serious diagnosis, and absences from federal events. For the Kremlin, Kadyrov remains a guarantor of stability. The question of a successor remains open. The law does not allow his sons to take the position of head before the age of 30. This means that Moscow will have to seek a compromise between the interests of the clan and the formal requirements of the law. And while the family prepares to inherit power after Ramzan's departure, behind the scenes, Moscow may be preparing a completely different scenario.